We begin with the big news that has just come in. India will extend its lockdown until the 31st of May. Lockdown 4.0 will come into effect from the 17th of May. And in the meanwhile, India has recorded over 90,000 COVID-19 infections and more than 2,800 deaths. We have Kartikeya Sharma now joining us on the phone line for the latest. Kartikeya, talk to us. This is lockdown 4.0, but it will come with significant relaxations to possibly public transport.
See, there are two very important aspects of this lockdown. One important aspect of this lockdown is that India has a federal structure constitutionally. Under the new NDMA Act, it will allow state governments to delineate red, green and orange zones, which will be decided by state and union territory governments after taking into consideration parameters shared by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and the Government of India. So the demand of most of the chief ministers in India that they should be allowed to redraw zones, red, green and orange, should be done by them and not center. So that's the biggest takeaway of the lockdown 4.0 version. But then the government says, the center in India, which is New Delhi, that it should adhere to the guidelines set by Ministry of Health and Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, another important aspect of this lockdown is that it permits interstate movement of passengers with the mutual consent of state government. It also permits intrastate movement of passenger vehicles and buses decided by state and UTs. And it also goes on to say that this lockdown 4.0 version will continue with night curfew in India. Now, to bring this into perspective, night curfew in India means that between 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning, no activity is allowed. People are not supposed to go outside. Children, women over age of 65. And then, importantly, air traffic, metro services, schools, colleges, educational training institutions, coaching institutions, hotels, restaurants, cinema halls, shopping malls, gymnasiums, swimming pools, entertainment parks, theaters, bars, auditoriums, assembly halls, sport complexes, religious institutions, religious places, places of worship shall be closed for public, and religious congregations are strictly prohibited. So lockdown 4.0 essentially retains every aspect of lockdown 3.0, but with one condition, that movement of people between states and in the state is allowed by the permission of the state government. And secondly, state can redraw their boundaries, which will allow them to create correct environment for economic activity. If you look at the release of the NDMA, it again states at the end of it that the state of the Union of India is empowering various state governments to ensure that economic activities take place in green zone. So I think this is the biggest takeaway of the lockdown 4.0 version. But containment zones, only essential activities shall be allowed. And I think all those parameters have been retained, including mandatory installation of Arogya Setu.
Kartikeya Sharma joining us as the story is breaking. India is extending its lockdown until the 31st of May. It's going to be lockdown 4.0, details of which Kartikeya was just telling us. Kartikeya, this also means this lockdown also comes with the caveat that domestic and international air travel, obviously, and metro services continue to be suspended.
Yes, all domestic and international air travel of passengers, except for domestic medical services or domestic air ambulances, or for security purpose, they will not take place, which are prohibited. Metro services are prohibited. So basically, your basic public mass transport is not going to function till 31st of May. So India will see a stronger lockdown in red zones and orange zones, but a leaner lockdown in green zones where state governments have been empowered to make their choice. And by virtue of delineating areas into red and green zones, for example, in the National Capital Region of India, Delhi, now the Chief Minister can take a call which parts of Delhi are green, which parts of Delhi are red, and which parts of Delhi are orange, and decide, and depending on that, economic activities with the strict provisions under the guidelines issued by Ministry of Home Affairs will be put into force. I think this is a big takeaway of today's decision by the Government of India.
Kartikeya Sharma, putting it into perspective what lockdown 4.0 is all about, the whole of India will now split into different zones according to state governments, and lockdown measures and restrictions and relaxations, the decisions of which has been further devolved into the hands of the states. That's what Kartikeya was talking about. Kartikeya, in that sense, it's the central government signaling to the regional state governments that now it's up to you to identify what is the reality on the ground and impose restrictions as need be.
There are two things here. One was the issue of revenue, because most of the state governments were going bankrupt because of the revenue issue. So, for example, the opening up of liquor shop was a painful decision because they knew that disruption in terms of people would exist, but it had to take place because of the money. And, for example, the movement of the migrant laborers, Indian economy depends on MSME labor. 29% of the Indian GDP, 40% of the Indian labor force is in medium and small scale industries. These are the people who work in one corner of the country, but remittances go to the other corner of the country. So in order to allow the movement and facilitate industrial production, it was I would say, important on part of the government to allow these people, the migrant labor who have suffered a lot of brunt during lockdown, to function as an important unit of economic activity. So for me, the perspective of Lockdown 4.0 is the movement of people as per the state, allowing the state government to divide the various territories into the zones, and zoning will help create a suitable environment for industrial production in MSME, for which more than 1 lakh crore was allocated when Nirmala Sitharaman held the press conference.
Kartikeya Sharma joining us for the breaking news story that we're tracking here on WION World is One. India is set to continue with its lockdown post the 17th of May, Lockdown 4.0, details of which flashing on your television screens. Interstate movement of vehicles and buses have been allowed, but all places of worship shall be closed for public. Religious gatherings have been strictly prohibited. Domestic and international air travel continues to remain suspended. Metro services continue to remain suspended. And as Kartikeya was just telling us, this is taking into account restarting industrial activity, for which migrant labor is a key economic contributor, and to facilitate their movement is the reason why in Lockdown 4.0, interstate movement has been allowed, and that will depend upon the coordination between the states and the allowances that the states give between each other. So that's the latest. India will be extending its lockdown till the 31st of May with crucial differences this time around. Post the 17th of May, states will have to identify their own red, green and orange zones and take action accordingly. Thank you, Kartikeya, for joining us.